Well, hello everyone! Now, most of you are probably pretty familiar with the Pythagorean Theorem. And you probably know it as a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And you were told that this is always true if you have a right triangle. A right triangle. So, one of your angles has to be 90 degrees. And then we call the two sides that make that 90-degree angle, we call those A and B. Doesn't matter which one, A and B, right? And the side opposite that right angle is the longest side, and we call that C. Okay? And then you take one leg and you square it, take the other leg and you square it, and you add them together, and what you get is the hypotenuse squared. Okay, yeah, that's true. And you thought that was only true for right triangles. Well, that is actually completely false. I claim that the Pythagorean Theorem holds and works for all triangles. Any triangle you can think of, every triangle in the world, the Pythagorean Theorem works for it. And I'm going to illustrate that right now. So, Pythagorean Theorem, as you know it, is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay? And in a right triangle, yes, that works. But the Pythagorean Theorem really doesn't stop right here. There's a little bit more to the Pythagorean Theorem. And we're just going to add that on. We're going to add a little bit more onto this. And what we're going to add on is 2 times the product of A and B. So it's just 2AB. And then, again, you may have seen this formula as the law of cosines, but there really is no law of cosines. The law of cosines is the Pythagorean Theorem. And it's normally not written quite like this. It's written a little differently where you're going to have just probably the c squared, or the c probably out here, and then have that equal something else. You're going to have minus this, and you're going to have a square root in there. And I think this law of cosines was always very hard for me to memorize. But then I realized the law of cosines it's not similar to, the law of cosines is Pythagorean Theorem. So if you just know the Pythagorean Theorem as the whole Pythagorean Theorem, that's the only thing you need to know. You never need to memorize the law of cosines. Because what I'm showing you here is the Pythagorean Theorem, and it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared plus 2ab, and then it's times the cosine of the angle between A and B. Between A and B, and we can call that angle theta. But theta is the angle between A and B. So let's take a look at our triangle here. Okay? The triangle that you probably always have written whenever you've done a Pythagorean Theorem problem. Okay, well, what is the angle between A and B? Well, in a right triangle, the angle between A and B has to be 90 degrees, right? The angle between A and B has to be your right angle. So what is the cosine of that angle? Well, it's the cosine of 90 degrees. Okay? Or pi over 2. But you probably want degrees, so what's the cosine of 90 degrees? Well, the cosine of 90 degrees is 0. The cosine of 90 degrees is 0, so we have 0 times 2ab. Well, that's 0. This whole term becomes 0 in a 90-degree triangle. So this formula works for a 90-degree triangle. It is the Pythagorean Theorem. but it holds for every triangle there is. And again, if you have a right triangle, well then you don't need this part because this whole part is going to be 0 because cosine of 90 degrees is 0. But if you only remember this, well then you're just limiting yourself to work with right triangles. Well, there's so many triangles in the world. Why not just, when you learn the Pythagorean theorem, learn this? And then you're set for all triangles. And then later on, when you have to use the law of cosines, you don't have to memorize it. Because you can always, this is the law of cosines. So again, Pythagorean theorem works for every triangle there is, and this is the Pythagorean theorem. All right, see you guys later.